Okay. Welcome to the Baluch podcast, Benjamin. Please introduce yourself.
Hey guys, I'm Benjamin. I'm a little bit of an older, I'm a little bit, I'm going to be age 40 next month, and I'm coming to you guys 2 p.m. in the United Kingdom just to talk about myself. How are you today?
Good. So, the first question I have is what inspired you to launch your Autism Experience podcast and the impact that you think it creates?
Okay, so since I was born in 1985, that's a great couldn't produce in mass quantities episodes like you can today, where you and I both have Zoom accounts.
Yes.
So, unfortunately, the biggest thing that I'll say to your audience is that if you have an idea that you're looking to explore, so this can be a podcast or this could be any business idea, I think the biggest thing that you want to consider is who's around in your circle. So the who's around in your circle is the biggest thing. Back then, I wanted to start a podcast, but unfortunately, everyone in my circle was literally in what we call a 9 to 5, where they were working for, a corporate business. So that's the kind of lifestyle that I came from, in which they're not wrong for people to, desire or push you to want to do this. But today, as we're finding out, the 9 to 5 isn't best for everybody. So basically, when we got to 2020 and everyone was on COVID lockdowns, technology had evolved to a good point where I could finally say to myself, this might be a good time for me to consider building something for myself. There was a situation that played out in my head. If I'm going to do this now is going to be the time to start building it and doing it, because it'll probably take about a good 5 years. But if I do this now, maybe 10 years from now, 15 years from now, I'll be in a somewhat better place. If I don't do this now, then I'm just going to be like everybody else. So what I ended up doing was I launched my podcast in January of 2022, finally, with my mentor and friend who's in Canada on his Zoom account. And from there, I, borrowed a Zoom, or when I had the money, then I started finally paying for my own Zoom account. And to this day, I've been recording when it's convenient for me.
Okay, that's really nice. So, the second question I have is how do you balance storytelling and advocacy when sharing experiences from the autism community?
So, another good question. When I started the podcast, I was establishing an audience within LinkedIn so that I could start bringing over some of my work that was on YouTube and that was already done by Zoom. I think what I did back then, when I was still learning how to be host in the first 2 years of the whole thing, was depending on who I had, sometimes I wouldn't talk about it. Other times I would be able to talk about it. It became a lot easier when you could discuss this with mental health counselors and social workers. And, I did have one advocate on in the first year who's a board member. So we were able to kind of start discussing personalized experiences a little more. It really depended on the guest.
Okay, so I was thinking, like, from your perspective, you are like in the social media side too. What role does digital media play in representing like public understanding of autism?
Say that again.
So, what role does digital media play in the public understanding of autism?
I think it allows people to see that a lot of our creative people, even here in the United States, at one point are on some level probably autistic or have ADHD. For example, if you look at how the media covered Elon Musk back at the start of the year, they were starting to try to label his behavior, how autistic adults behave, and that's not true. Elon Musk comes from a very wealthy family, and he is who he is and who he shows himself to be. He's, from what I understand from one of my guests, a very smart individual who's got autism and ADHD, but he doesn't act the same way Benjamin does. So
Okay.
I think digital media in this sense today uh, plays a big role in at least me being able to show myself for who I am.
So I was going to also ask, like, what digital platforms do you use for your podcast? Zoom, like
My
me, or any
podcast
others?
right now is on YouTube and I'm promoting it mainly on LinkedIn. I'm I have plans, touchy topics like this. LinkedIn isn't necessarily a bad place to start off building something like this.
Okay. So, like, in another question, it's more based on like needs in healthcare sector. In your experience, what do you think are the biggest gaps in the healthcare sector regarding addressing autism, or do you think there are none right now?
Uh, I think if I'm gonna be as nice as possible to my old industry since I'm no longer in the industry right now because of personal circumstances. But I think we have to separate clinical diagnosis done by a doctor versus clinical diagnosis done by somebody who's a psychologist, a mental health counselor, or a social worker with a licensed master in social work. Both can prescribe, but I think the biggest gap in healthcare would be more about the understanding of autism. Autism for a high functioning is just, I will need,
Functioning. Won't technology
what
help
do
it?
you see technology, what do you see that technology could do? And then I might be able to provide an
I
answer.
mean, like identifying the different levels of it, or no?
So what you're
Of,
saying from your perspective, since you're over in the UK, is you could see something like artificial intelligence helping to better understand the diagnosis.
I don't know that myself since I'm not autistic, but I was thinking, yeah.
It could actually, from my understanding, because I do have several friends within the mental health sector, the idea with using artificial intelligence in two different health fields would be it'll free them up it'll handle most of the administrative and probably give them a better understanding before they see their client on, what you're up against and be able to develop a good plan. So that's where it would be a plus and it would save some time so that the mental health worker could more focus on, you know, some type of a treatment plan and what would best suit the client.
Okay, now I'm moving on to a different topic. It's more about your experience in the healthcare sector, like you mentioned
Okay.
earlier. So, what skills have been the most important for you, like that you gained from the healthcare sector?
The biggest thing is I was already existing in customer service for quite a while before I got into my, years before I transitioned into the healthcare sector.
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest things that I learned in the healthcare sector that I can carry with me for the rest of my life would be listening more carefully to people, which was a skill that I had a very difficult time with before healthcare. I think that improved over the time that I spent in healthcare. And I'm grateful for that because I think being, when I'm scheduling appointments, what it taught me besides, improved ability with technologies and programs was also to listen to the patients a little more carefully and try to understand human beings better.
Okay, that's really good. So, you have your own podcast, like we mentioned earlier, right? I was
Yeah.
wondering, like, if there was any moment that taught you like a vital lesson for you, like from the podcast. Is there any that you learned?
I think from the podcast, one thing that I learned aside from being a digital advocate, I learned to refine my voice. That was
Okay.
huge before because I was all over the place. Not only did I refine my voice, but my things that were not always addressed in my past that got better were, and also from healthcare that came over to the podcast, checking my grammar, checking my spelling, utilizing tools to be able to write a lot more clearer than I once was able to, as that was a huge problem in the 2010s and the 2000s. When the red pen used to come out, I was always feared because everyone would say the same thing. You're not grammar checking. You're not being careful with your written language. Your emails look like they're a mess. And, this stuff is going to be important as you're working, because oral communication and written communication is one of the most important things that you're going to do in your life, no matter what you do. And they weren't wrong for saying that. So that's one thing within the podcast that completely improved my ability to talk to people, my ability to, which was already there before the podcast, but got refined afterwards. And then I think what carried over besides the voice was just understanding how to operate something.
Okay. It's the last question now. I was going to say, what advice would you give someone like who's thinking of going into the healthcare sector?
I would say if you want to enter the healthcare sector for the first time, be patient. The salaries aren't the issue. The salary looks like it's going to be the issue, but the one thing with healthcare right now, even though it's a business, is healthcare can provide something that other industries might not be, which is a level of patience as in your development. So if you're being hired as a 20-year-old, this is a human-centric field. So what I mean by a human-centric field is as follows. You'll be working, if you're Gen Z and you're coming into the workforce for the first time, this is the first time in human history where you'll be working with millennials, Gen X, boomers, and whatever's left of silent generation. You'll be working with 4 generations. Soon with Gen Alpha coming up, we'll have 5.
That was all the questions for today. Thank you for coming on the Baluch podcast.
Thank you, Fahad. Thank you for having me.